You wake up thirsty, your mouth is dry, your throat feels rough. You reach for a glass beside your bed, turn on a tap, and drink without thinking about it. The water is clear, it doesn't smell dangerous, you don't need to know where it came from. Now imagine doing the same thing 100,000 years ago. You're standing in an unfamiliar landscape. There is no bottle, no faucet, no map showing rivers. You can see water in the distance, but you don't know if it will make you sick. And one mistake can be fatal. Today, you can survive for weeks without food. Without water, severe dehydration can become life-threatening within only a few days. But prehistoric humans didn't have water purification systems. They had something more primitive. They had to learn how to read the landscape. And the surprising part is that humans may have been doing this far earlier than we usually imagine. At Gesher Benot Yaakov, archaeologists found evidence of repeated human occupation beside an ancient lake more than 780,000 years ago. The location wasn't random. It was surrounded by freshwater, animals, plants, and raw materials. For generations, humans returned to the same kind of places. Water wasn't simply something you found, it became something you learned to predict. But here's where it gets stranger. Long before written maps, you could learn where water was by watching what was alive. At Olduvai Gorge, archaeological evidence shows repeated occupation by early humans over hundreds of thousands of years. The environment changed dramatically over time. Lakes expanded, they disappeared, rivers shifted, dry ground became wetlands. For humans living there, survival depended on recognizing those changes. You couldn't simply walk toward the nearest visible water. A large river could contain parasites, animal waste, or dangerous microorganisms. A stagnant pool could be worse, but flowing water was different. A spring emerging directly from the ground was different again, and animals could reveal places you couldn't see. Large herds repeatedly moving toward one direction could indicate water. Birds gathering in a particular area could provide another clue. Green vegetation during a dry season could be an even stronger signal. You didn't need to understand groundwater, you only needed to notice patterns, and those patterns could be remembered. A group that found a reliable spring might return to it months later. The next generation could learn the same route. Eventually, the landscape itself became a kind of memory system, but knowing where water existed was only the first problem. You still had to know which water was safe. Imagine finding a beautiful pool after walking for hours. The water is perfectly clear, you drink, nothing happens immediately, but several days later your stomach begins to hurt. You develop diarrhea, you become weaker, and now you're losing even more water than you're consuming. This is one of the most dangerous things about contaminated water. You can't always see the threat, and prehistoric humans had no concept of bacteria, no microscopes, no laboratory tests, no warning label, yet they could still develop practical rules. They could observe which sources repeatedly caused illness. They could notice that some pools smelled bad. They could distinguish flowing water from stagnant water. They could watch animals. They could return to sources that consistently worked. This is important because human survival wasn't based on knowing the scientific explanation. It was based on remembering consequences. If one water source repeatedly made people sick, the group could avoid it. If another source remained reliable through dry seasons, it became valuable. That knowledge could be passed from adult to child, and eventually it could become part of a migration route. But there was another problem. What happened when the familiar water disappeared? That's where prehistoric intelligence became much more important. Around 20,000 years ago, humans were living through the final stages of the last ice age. Large parts of the world were colder and drier than today. In some regions, finding water could mean following seasonal rivers or locating underground sources. Humans repeatedly occupied caves near the coast during the Middle and later Stone Age. The caves weren't useful simply because they provided shelter. They were positioned within a landscape containing access to food, animals, plants, and water. Location mattered. A shelter close to several resources gave you options. A shelter surrounded by empty land did not. And humans became extremely good at choosing places where different resources overlapped. This is one reason archaeological sites are so valuable. A single stone tool tells you that someone was there, but thousands of tools, animal bones, hearts, and remains accumulated over generations can reveal something bigger. They show where humans repeatedly chose to live. And when those places consistently appear near reliable water, a pattern begins to emerge. Humans weren't wandering blindly across the landscape. They were selecting landscapes. They were remembering landscapes. And eventually, they were changing how they used them. But there was still one final problem. A river could move. A lake could dry up. A spring could disappear. So the most valuable survival skill wasn't simply finding water. It was knowing where water would be next.